Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Paul Valdez. I am the Associate Director in our Bowling Green State University Center for Public Impact. And today's session is focused on the basics of community-based learning, or the community-based learning fundamentals. And I wanted to just take a moment to see who was on the Zoom with us. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to introduce yourself, tell us, what department you're in and kind of what drew you to this particular workshop. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just facilitate that. So Travis, you're the first person I see, so if you wouldn't mind starting.
Yes, so my name's Travis. I'm a third-year PhD student from the Rhetoric and Writing program in the English department. And right now I'm developing a course for my prelim materials that involves community-based learning. So I thought this presentation would be extremely helpful for that.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Joanna, would you like to go next?
I'm Joanna. My pronouns are she, her. I am a GA for community-based learning in the Center for Public Impact, and I'm also a PhD student in American Culture Studies.
Great, thank you very much, Joanna. Katie, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm also a GA in the Center for Public Impact. I'm a first-year public administration master's student, and for the last 2.5 years before this, I was actually a coordinator of community-based learning at Marietta College in Southeast Ohio.
Thanks, Katie. Next we have Annie.
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm a second-year student in the PhD Rhetoric and Writing Studies program. And I actually, just like Travis, I designed a course that is based on like community-based learning, and I just wanted to learn more about it.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Sandra.
Hello, I'm Sandra Faulkner. I'm a professor in the School of Media and Communication, and I hope to introduce some of this in some classes that I'm teaching. So particularly relational communication.
Great, well, thank you very much. Well, hopefully you'll find the content to be what you're looking for today. I will definitely share out the video recording as well as the PowerPoint after this session so that you have that content at your disposal. For many of you, if you want to use some of the visuals or the diagrams that we go over today, then that might be helpful for you. So in terms of today's session, this is our agenda. Really, we want to talk a little bit about some of the definitions around community-based learning and why we use that term, some of the benefits of community-based learning based on the research. We want to talk a little bit about modes of engagement because being explicit about kind of how we are engaging students in these different types of community-based experiences. We'll talk a little bit about reflection, specifically critical reflection. We've also added some content about online community-based learning because of this unique moment we're in with the pandemic and transitioning all of our courses online. And so for community-based learning or more experiential-based learning courses, that presents some unique challenges. And then we have some example courses that we will highlight as well. Throughout the time, if there is a question that you have, please feel free to stop me and ask that question. I'd rather you ask it, when it's on your mind as opposed to waiting until the very end. So please feel free to do that. So kind of jumping right into some of our definitions. At BGSU, we've adopted this definition of community-based learning. This comes from Bringle and Hatcher. And this is a definition that many institutions utilize within higher education. So as you can see there, community-based learning is also known as service learning. It is credit bearing. There are such things as service learning or community-based learning that are non-credit bearing, but for the way that we've defined it here, we've defined it as a credit bearing experience. So you're taking academic material and you're pairing that up with relevant community-based engagement or service activities. And then you're helping the students to reflect upon their experience and reflect upon the content in the class through critical reflection techniques. And you're approaching this, this activity as a mutually beneficial and reciprocal partnership with the community partners that you're working with. So it's not just about the students learning, but it's also about the community partners and what they're benefiting from it, and how they're being co-educators and co-facilitators and co-creators of the experience. Ultimately, you know, our goals with this type of learning are that we're helping to reinforce the academic disciplinary learning outcomes, but we're also trying to help develop students' civic outcomes, their civic learning, their civic skills, their civic identity. And ultimately that is working towards larger public purposes. So you've heard the tagline, the public university for the public good, right? So this fits in very well in terms of aligning with that you know, mission of the institution. The diagram there, kind of the visual diagram, kind of helps to showcase, you know, when you have all three of these components of the academic study, the practical experience, and the specific focus on civic learning, civic engagement, where all three of those overlap, that's the space for community-based learning or service learning. And you can kind of see where only maybe two of those pieces overlap. That's, you know, maybe the terminology is a little bit different. Those are important aspects of student experiences as well. So like internships and field work, you know, they may not be as heavily focused on stressing the civic engagement or the civic learning, but the academic study and the practical experience are clearly there. So I find that the visual is very helpful in kind of understanding, you know, where all three of those pieces intersect. So I think it's worth noting that we have used two kind of terms interchangeably, right, so far. And we at BGSU, we've committed to using the term community-based learning. We're not going to hold your feet to the fire if you use the term service learning. But some of the reasons why we've made that distinction here at BGSU is because that service learning, it can be very value laden. So like when you think of the term service, you automatically think of like direct service on a long, like for many activities. But we want you to think broader than just direct service, right? You know, there are community-based research partnerships that are possible. There's community advocacy. There's, you know, community organizing. You know, there's ways that you can involve students in community that doesn't just involve direct service. Also, the term service can sometimes be, it has some baggage with it in terms of like a unidirectional relationship, right? So oftentimes it can be like, I'm going to serve you, I'm going to help you, right? I'm in a position of privilege and power, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to make you better, or I'm going to fix this. And we kind of want to dismantle that kind of thinking. We don't necessarily want to position the university as like we know everything, because again, we want to come to the relationship with an expectation that our community partner is going to contribute a significant amount in terms of the learning process, in terms of the teaching process, and that you know, we're not just saying we're taking our resources and our skills and applying it to the community. Also with community-based learning, I think that it provides you with some flexibility in your approaches. And so I think you will see a little bit of that as we continue on throughout the presentation. I'm going to stop there though, and I'm going to just kind of ask a general question. What are your thoughts about the difference in language there? Maybe I need to rephrase the question. Like, is there, I guess with service learning or versus community-based learning, is there one that you would prefer?
I put a comment in the chat, but I think what I like about the idea of community-based learning is that it seems to have a real focus on collaboration.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what it says to me.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we will continue on. And if you have any other thoughts about this particular piece, then we can kind of work that in a little bit later. In terms of the research around community-based learning, many of you might be familiar with High Impact Practices. It's a publication that came out in 2008 from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And community-based learning is listed as one of the high impact practices, along with, you know, capstone courses, learning communities, diversity and equity programming, internships. Those are some of the other high impact practices. But in terms of community-based learning, the research definitely kind of highlights that the benefits for students kind of fall into these four categories around academic benefits, interpersonal benefits, the personal growth and development that they experience from these types of courses, and then of course the college experience. So, you know, helping students to feel connected to the community and feel connected to the institution, which helps with their persistence and their retention at BGSU or any institution. So I won't go through all of these particular benefits for students, but you know, for each of you in terms of how you're developing your courses and how you, some of the goals that you may have in mind, you might want to keep some of these benefits in mind as you're constructing your learning outcomes or you're constructing your goals for your course. In terms of faculty and institutional benefits, of course, the persistence and retention that I mentioned just recently was, you know, that's a big factor, right? Like, we want students to feel connected to the institution. We want them to feel connected to the community, because if they do, then they tend to stick around and they tend to finish and graduate in time and with a degree. So we want to make sure that that's a part of it, but there's also other institutional benefits as well as benefits for you individually as the faculty member. You know, a lot of faculty members that I speak with that utilize this is that it is a new way for them to kind of invigorate their teaching and even their research activities as well. And so it's a new challenge. It's a new kind of way to kind of engage students, and so they really enjoy the process. It is a lot of work and it can be challenging at moments because you're managing a lot of new expectations from community partners. There's a lot of ambiguity that goes on with it. But working through that discomfort and working through those challenges, there's a lot of growth and benefits that come from that. So that's part of what we see when we work with faculty in this realm. You know, obviously we are promoting the Bowling Green experience as a public university for the public good. So these types of courses help us to illuminate, you know, like, this is how, you know, BGSU is contributing to the region. It is contributing to community and is in partnership with community, and why, you know, having a university in your backyard, there are some benefits that come with that. I think the other thing too is that is clear with this type of pedagogy is specifically that it helps you kind of reset how you approach the learning process. So, you know, many of you may already be using like flipped classroom types of experiences. And so it repositions like who has power within the classroom, who has that authority, that expertise, right? Because again, faculty, you're serving in a role where you're helping to facilitate, but you're not able to control every single experience that the student is having or every single experience that they're having with a community partner. And so the students are gaining some authority and some power and some expertise that they're sharing, as well as the community partners sharing that expertise and information with the group. So previously I mentioned, you know, different modes of engagement, and with community-based learning, service learning, I think most people focus on direct service, right? So direct engagement with a particular client or population, which typically happens at a service site. So these are things like tutoring or serving food or doing coaching, you know, those types of activities. And those are great activities to do. And I would say keep doing those types of activities if they directly support the learning outcomes of your course, and what you're trying to assist in developing with the students. Direct service is often a very good fit for first year experiences, right? So you have to keep in mind the level of class that you're teaching, because oftentimes, you know, maybe students may not have interaction with difference, right? And so through direct service, this is a way for them maybe to better understand the scope of the community issues that exist. Non-direct is that, you know, the activities may occur at the community site, but they don't necessarily come into contact with the people or the clients being served at that site, right? So you may be in the back warehouse sorting food, you might be removing invasive species, you know, those types of activities are considered more non-direct because you're not actually coming into contact with the populations being served. Indirect is considered more physically distant. So these are more project-based types of activities. So these could be, you know, developing a website. It could be doing, you know, advocacy projects. It could be writing a grant proposal. You know, so those types of things, you're working in partnership with a community partner to identify what a best grant might be, but you're not necessarily going to the site, touring the site, or you know, doing any of that non-direct or direct service on site. And then community-based research, I would say, is a form of indirect, but it involves a lot more partnership with the community partner in terms of co-creating what the research question is, why that research question is important for both the faculty member to examine and the student if there's a course connected with it, and then how that research and how that data will be applied within the community context. So that one, again, is more indirect, but it involves a lot more mutual collaboration to kind of come up with those research questions and what you want to pursue. Just kind of stopping there real quickly, are there any particular modes of engagement that you feel would be best for your courses that you mentioned at the beginning?
I'm most likely leaning more toward the indirect mode of engagement. What I'm looking for in terms of my prelim exam materials is a class that covers business writing, and that would include writing grant proposals for organizations in the community.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, you know, there's a couple of examples of that on campus that you may find helpful. So Dr. Shannon Orr, she actually did some grant writing with a group of students in the public administration program this past summer, really related towards meeting COVID-19 needs. So she's a great resource for you, as well as Dr. Neil Baird. He is, and I think, I'm remembering you now because you helped to co-present in the Dovia presentation. So that's where I've seen you before. I apologize I didn't recognize you right away, but yes. How about for other folks?
Hi, this is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that Annie?
Yeah, that's fine. You can go.
Oh, okay. I'd say this is Sandra Faulkner. I'm really interested in the community-based research. And I've been thinking about, I have a colleague in gerontology, and I've really been thinking about how is it that maybe we could partner with some of those organizations right in the community, particularly in my relational communication class, because I've been thinking a lot about loneliness when we think about older populations and COVID. And I mean, some of it's because of my parents who've been isolated and really haven't gone anywhere in months. So it seems that there could be some, you know, opportunity there to do something. along those lines.
Absolutely. And I know that you are good friends with Dr. Kate Maximum
Yeah.
Connell. So she is definitely a great resource in terms of how she set up her interpersonal communication, intervention, and working with the Wood County Committee on Aging. And I would say that that topic that you just mentioned in terms of like isolation and having some conversations with them earlier in the summer, they are definitely experiencing that. And I think that they are well primed to want to have more programming or more activities, whether it's research-based or even more programmatic-based. So that would be a good fit, I think.
Terrific. I need to get on that tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Well, and if you need an introduction to some of the contacts down there, like you said, you're working with somebody in gerontology, so I know that they're very well connected with the Wood County Committee on Aging as well.
Yep. Terrific.
Great.
Thanks.
Annie, how about you?
The course that I created, I mean, I don't plan on teaching it for another year, but I do like have a draft of the syllabus, and I have it set up so that like it's kind of open to all of these modes, and I don't know if that's like productive or effective, or if like I should have it like going into that class we're only doing this mode. I don't know.
Sure. No, I think that's it all depends on kind of, again, those learning outcomes that you're trying to accomplish, what mode is going to assist with that. So if all of those modes assist with achieving those outcomes, then I think, you know, you should utilize all of them. It might get a little bit challenging to manage all the different modes, just if in terms of student expectation and when you're assessing them or you're evaluating them. But it's not to say that you can't have multiple modes. It's not surprising to me, like the indirect is something that I think a lot of people, especially right now, are gravitating towards, because, you know, there are limitations for sending students off campus and into community organizations to do that direct service. There are still those opportunities that exist. It's just that a lot of our nonprofit partners, government partners, you know, they've, you know, implemented policies where students are not able to kind of come in and do the same type of direct service that they were doing previously. One other visual that I wanted to share with all of you, and I think this kind of helps to enhance, you know, kind of the conversation around the different modes of service. But when talking with students about like ways to create social change, this social change wheel is a 2.0 version, which recently came out from Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact. But what you can see there is on the outside of the wheel, right out here, you've got the different strategies that can be utilized to create social change, right? So these can be strategies that you incorporate into your course, right? So it may not just be direct service, or it may not just be like, you know, voting, which is, you know, something that's prominent right now. But there's a lot of other ways that you can participate in community and strategies for creating social change. So this is a helpful graphic, I think, that you might, you know, utilize in your courses to kind of share with students those different strategies. One of the changes that they made for the 2.0 version of this wheel is that they put inside this inner wheel, which is campus-based strategies. So community-based learning, or they use the term community-engaged teaching and learning, is one of those strategies. Civic-minded career readiness. So there's a variety of ways, you know, from a campus that we can, you know, implement social change utilizing the outside strategies as well. And then at the very core, anti-racism, equity, and co-creation are the foundation or the values of, you know, what we're trying to work towards in terms of social change, right? We want equity to be a central point. We want anti-racism to be a central focus, and that we're co-creating with community with these strategies, and it's not just the university. So previously I mentioned that reflection is a critical component of community-based learning, and it is the tool that you have at your disposal to be able to help students make sense of the experience that they're gaining, whether that's direct, indirect, non-direct, or those various different strategies for social change. So those experiences and helping them make the direct connections with the academic content that you're providing, and also for them to be able to share their personal experiences, and bring in that own personal kind of expertise into the equation, because our students don't come to us as blank slates. Like, they come to us with lots of rich experiences that, through every new experience that they have, they're making sense of the world and they're developing and growing and learning. And so we want to acknowledge that, and we want that to be part of their learning process as well. So if you just have experience but you don't have reflection, it's not likely that there's going to be as much learning that goes on. So the scaffolding and the structure that you build for students around reflection is very important in community-based learning courses. In terms of how you develop that, Eiler, Giles, and Smead, they have the 4 C's of reflection. And I think these are good to kind of keep in mind. It's a good mnemonic device as well, the 4 C's, to be able to think about how you structure your reflection for your students. So you don't want your reflection to just be one final assignment, but you want it to be continuous throughout the course, right? So it could be continuous in that you do some pre-reflection assignments before they even start their service. It could be that throughout the semester you're checking in, or you're having them keep a journal, or you're having them keep various different reflection components built into the assignments that you assign all throughout the course. So you want it to be continuous, one, so that they get practice in how they learn how to reflect, because students may not necessarily know what you mean by reflection. They might think that you mean, well, just tell me about how you feel. Well, there's more involved than just like how you feel. It's like, how are you connecting the content? How are you making sense of this? How are you going to be acting differently in the future now that you know some of these new pieces of information? So the continuous piece is very important. You want the reflection framework that you create to be connected to the content and the experience. And so students are very good at identifying busy work, right? And so if they suspect that this is, just a busy work kind of component, they may be more resistant to really engaging in it in the way that you want them to engage. And you might miss the opportunity really to help them, again, make those connections to the academic material, and help them develop that professional expertise. So just making sure it's relevant to whatever the content is that you're providing in the course and the experiences that you're asking them to engage in. In terms of the 3rd C, challenging, like, we want students to feel challenged and to critically examine their own biases and their own assumptions through their reflections, right? So we don't want them to stay at the surface level in terms of how they're reflecting about things, but we want them to dive deeper, right? There's going to be a lot of ouch moments, right? Whenever they start to realize, oh, wow, poverty is more prominent than I expected, or, whatever the particular community issue is, there are going to be some ouch points, and they're going to have to kind of struggle internally with, how that makes them feel, but then also, their own biases and assumptions that make them feel that way, or lead to, reinforcing certain systems of oppression. So, as the facilitator in the course, as the faculty member in the course, you have the opportunity to kind of help them dig deeper and do that critical examination, and not just kind of stay at the superficial level of examination. And then last but not least, contextualized. So the reflection format, so the activities that you choose, whether they're formal or informal activities, should be contextualized for the course. And so, perfect example is, your reflection activities during COVID-19 are going to be delivered through a Zoom format or through a WebEx format, and so you're going to have to be creative in how you help facilitate that dialogue or facilitate the reflection for the students based on the format of the technology tool that you have at your disposal. And so in non-COVID times, again, the way the room is set up will impact your facilitation, right? Or will impact your opportunity for reflection. Who you have in the room, might facilitate different conversations. If the community partner is participating in those reflections. So again, the contextualized nature just needs to fit the format of your goals and format of the course. Any questions about those 4 C's or about reflection in general that I've shared so far? No? Okay. Well, one way that, one tool or one model that we like to highlight is the D.E.A.L model of reflection. So D.E.A.L stands for Describe, Examine, and Articulate Learning. And so, as I mentioned before, sometimes students don't necessarily know like a structure or a model for reflecting. And so if you can utilize this model to kind of build out your activities, then it will kind of give them a structure to be able to reflect. So the describe is really exactly that. It's more objective description of the experience. You don't want them to start jumping into the analysis portion. Really, it's the who, what, when, where, those components of their experience. So if they're doing direct service, who did they serve with? Who was at the site? Where did it take place? Those types of things you just want them to describe. And as maybe Travis, you might be able to articulate this, like just the simple act of writing that down, right? And just being kind of objective of it, it forces them to think about things that they may have observed, but they didn't think so much about. But in writing it down and reflecting on it, it makes them re-examine, the conditions that were taking place while they were serving. So the examine piece is more of the why piece, right? So you've had this experience, so let's look at it, okay? So we've been giving you some tools in our class. We have, theoretical frameworks, we have academic content, we have research, we have methods that we've kind of been going through. How did those apply to your experience? How did you see those play out directly within that experience that you're having? So this gives you the opportunity to help them connect that academic content to the lived experience that they've had. And this examination portion can be, it can be professional, right? So if one of your learning goals is trying to really help career preparation for them, then your professional standards, you might be able to ask some questions for them to be able to say, okay, how did you see the professional standards of X discipline play out within the experience? But it could also be personal too, so their own personal growth and their own personal learning. And it also could be civic, right? So like, how did they see, democratic principles play out within the experience that they had, right? So you can kind of help them, connect that civic learning specifically to the questions that you ask them to examine in this part of the reflection model. The last piece is the articulate learning. So we want to help them understand, like, okay, so you've had an experience and you've kind of thought about how the academic or personal or career or civic content connects to that experience. Okay, so you've done that. Are you thinking differently now about what that means for you? Has it changed your perception? Will it change your behavior in the future? If so, how? Tell me how. But then also, like, you're asking them to tell you what they learned, tell you how they learned it, tell you, why it matters, so those types of things are what we're really getting at when we're saying articulate the learning. Another easy way to kind of remember this type of model is the what, so what, now what model, which are a little simpler, but I think we definitely like the D.E.A.L model of reflection because it kind of expresses these I think in a little bit more of a nuanced way. If you're more of a visual learner, Ash and Clayton put together this diagram. One thing I particularly enjoy about this diagram is that it reinforces that reflection as an iterative process. So you don't just reflect once and then lo and behold, you have all the learning that you need, but, and you don't just have one experience, you have multiple experiences all the time. And so those experiences are constantly informing your learning, and you're constantly taking that new knowledge and that new growth and reapplying it to the new experiences that you have moving forward. In terms of civic learning and outcomes, just to be a little bit more clear about what we mean there, for civic knowledge, it's our history, right, as the United States, as the world, in terms of a democratic government. What does that history look like? What cultures are involved in that? What cultures are represented or maybe not represented within that civic knowledge? What structures are in place in terms of how we operate within our political system? So that is kind of like some of the base civic knowledge in terms of if you're looking to focus on that as a particular learning outcome. When it comes to civic skills, how are we helping students to develop their communication skills, communication across difference, communication to specific audiences, right? So communicating to peers in a research journal is very different than communicating to your community partner that you've worked with, right? In terms of how you communicate the content or the research that you're gaining from like a community-based research experience. Additionally, critical thinking skills. How are we helping students develop, those skills for taking information from lots of different sources and processing through it and thinking about how their own values and biases and assumptions come into play. With civic values, as a democracy, we value empathy, we value freedom, we value equity, we value diversity, we value independence, so those types of things, are important to kind of identify. And those are really actually good things to help identify at the beginning of courses, because it kind of helps students to, articulate their own values from the beginning and see how they're connected to these larger systematic values around democracy. For civic identity, it's that professional and personal focus. How are students developing their specific identity when it comes to participating in community and being community engaged people and professionals. And then when it comes to collective action, it's a lot of all of these kind of civic knowledge, skills, values, and identity all coming together, right? And how do you collaborate with other people to, organize for an activity, or how do you come together to create change in your community? One of the things that we definitely like to emphasize too is that there will be variation in intensity for community-based learning courses. So IUPUI, they put together this taxonomy, which has these different domains of reciprocal partnerships, community activities, civic competencies, diversity, critical reflection, and assessment. So it's sort of organized like a rubric. And so you've got a 1 over here and a 4 over here. And so for each of these domains, you may start out as a 1 in some of these domains and then work towards a 4 as you increase the intensity of that particular domain. And so we put this in here because I think it's important that, the first time you teach a community-based learning course, you're not going to be at the highest intensity in every single category for that first time around, because these types of courses, they take time to build and to develop and to evolve, right? And so as you're working with your community partner, you're learning new information, you're pivoting to things that are happening with the community partner, but then also within society in general, right? So within COVID is a perfect example, right? The level of intensity that you can do with certain community activities might be different now because of the COVID situation. So we want you to recognize that, like, you may start off in the lower intensity area, but you can always be working towards higher intensity as you continue to evolve your community-based learning courses. In terms of online or e-service learning, this is a helpful diagram that kind of showcases some of the different forms of e-service learning. So you can kind of see that you have service as one of the components and instruction as the other component. So depending on whether the service is on-site or online, and whether the instruction is on-site or online, it kind of creates 4 different distinct models of service learning. So in the upper left quadrant, both of those are on-site. So both service and instruction is on-site. That's what we consider traditional service learning or traditional community-based learning. But if you have the service online and the instruction is on-site, that's considered the type 2. If the service is on-site, but the instruction is online, then that's type 1, is what they consider here in this typology. And then if both of them are online, so both instruction and both service is online, then that's considered extreme service learning. I don't know if I necessarily like the terminology extreme service learning. It makes me think of like extreme sports and I need to chug a Mountain Dew or something, but it's one of those things that I don't think anybody had predicted that we would be in an environment where extreme service learning actually might be the norm, right? Because right now, both instruction and a lot of service activities are taking place online. And then in the middle of the diagram is, e-service learning type 3, which kind of has a little bit of each of these components, right? And so that might be that you start out the semester more like where you do a lot more in-person site visits and you do some in-person like on-site serving, but then you kind of transition to the project being online, right? And so you might have different phases that reflect different hybrid formats of e-service learning throughout the course. Any questions about that particular diagram in terms of e-service learning? Okay, well, a couple of resources for you. And again, I'm going to be sending you all this presentation. So these hyperlinks will be available for you. And you may have seen these come out already. Back in the spring when we did make that pivot to online teaching and learning, we put together a community-based learning live guide, which has a lot of resources for you in terms of like, how do you do the online community engagement really well. So that particular live guide is a really good resource for you. The Falcons Help webpage, what we've done there is we've curated a variety of different opportunities that we're aware of that are either urgent needs. So those are some more of the direct service types of activities that we know of within the community that is responding to COVID-19. But then there's a variety of other activities on there that are more virtual service learning opportunities or virtual volunteering opportunities. And so a lot of the opportunities that we listed there, they were already established online volunteer activities. So they didn't just come into existence because of COVID. They were already having students and individuals do that online volunteering. So they've kind of worked through some of the challenges, right, that comes with online volunteering, and they've set up good structures for students to be able to engage in those online volunteer activities. Some of them are, storytelling based, some of them are data entry based, some of them are, mapping projects, like mapping racial justice, racial injustice, So there's a variety of different activities that are listed there. And then Dr. Shannon Orr, she is a long-term service learning, community-based learning faculty member at BGSU in political science. And so she put together a very interesting blog post in Medium called Service Learning During Coronavirus. And so she went through a variety of academic disciplines and kind of identified some online virtual volunteer opportunities that may fit each of those specific academic disciplines. So those are three very helpful items that you might utilize as you continue to think about your community-based learning courses and get connected to partners. The other piece that I wanted to share with you is there is an online equity rubric. So as we're in this online space, Peralta put together this online equity rubric. And so it focuses in on these various different domains of your course design. So thinking about, is the technology accessible to everyone? What kinds of student resources and support do you promote to your students so that they can effectively engage in online learning? Is the online learning set up for universal design so that all learners can access the content equally? Diversity and inclusion in terms of choices about setting up the technology and setting up the online course. Images and representation within the way that you set up the online course. Human bias that, are you directly outlining, how human bias might impact your course design in an online format. Content, meaning, and connection and belonging. So are you including, these kind of messages to students and putting those in your syllabus and putting those again in your online course design. So the particular rubric has a lot more content which kind of breaks that down for you. And so we could probably spend an entire session on this particular slide or on this particular rubric, but I will kind of, again, the PowerPoint has the link for you to be able to kind of look at that and kind of maybe do an assessment of your online courses and see if there's areas for improvement. The things that are highlighted a little bit more are bolded, like diversity and inclusion, human bias, content, meaning, connection, and belonging. I put those in bold because those are really good places that you might think about, like reflection assignments, or you might be able to think about how you build those into your reflection strategy for an online course. I guess some of the other things related to the pandemic, just to highlight, when we've talked to faculty and we've talked to community partners, yes, maybe the format of some of the activities changes dramatically for us, but in terms of the intent and our goals for learning, like making sure that the academic and civic learning outcomes are achieved, those are still the same, right? Those don't change in a pandemic. They just, there's just new challenges, there's new community needs that arise during the pandemic. In terms of safety, there are definitely some safety aspects, especially when it comes to transportation and with students serving on site. And so both the university has guidelines for transportation of students. You can transport students, but it's a little trickier because you have to have larger vehicles, you have to potentially have more vehicles, and so it may become cost prohibitive to transport students, and then it also might not be the best thing to transport them in terms of if we can do something online, if we can do something via Zoom or via a webinar. And then, things are constantly changing with the pandemic. And so I think with one of the e-service learning models previously, designing your courses so that they are flexible and nimble, right? So like maybe you concentrate some of the in-person activities at the very beginning, right? And then clearly you're designing it so that you shift online later in the semester. So like for this particular semester, we go until Thanksgiving, and then we have 2 weeks after that where we have, all online instruction. So you're probably already thinking of that, but we don't know what the future looks like for the spring or for future years. And so you may want to take that into consideration as you design your courses. And then when it comes to the course type, I think really there it's thinking about what's going to fit best for the different audiences you have in your course. So a first year course design looks very different than a capstone experience for students. And I know you all are very familiar with that, but again, for community-based learning, sometimes students in the first year, your goals may not be as lofty, or they may not be as big in the first year, because you need to give them that foundational level of experience, and then you can have more like deeper learning outcomes for capstone experiences or courses further along in the curriculum. Okay, so before I kind of go on, are there any questions, or are there any thoughts from all of you at this point? Okay. Well, in terms of some of the best practices, I know that this particular writing from Jeff Howard, it came from the University of Michigan, and I think it was put out in, I want to say, in the 1990s sometime. However, it has definitely stood the test of time in terms of like some of the best practices for approaching community-based learning. And we emphasize it here because, again, there's a lot of shifts that you have to make as the faculty member in terms of like your positionality within the course, and how students are positioned within the course, and how community partners are positioned within the course. So first off, like the academic credit is for learning, not for service hours completed, right? So students often will say, well, I completed all the service hours, I should get an A in this course because I did what you asked me to do. Well, no, you're asking them to demonstrate their learning through reflection assignments, through other assignments that you assign. Sheer completion of service should not be what you're awarding a grade for. At first, when community-based learning and service learning kind of developed within higher education, there was a lot of apprehension around it that it wasn't as rigorous as other courses. But again, I think that as long as you are very clear in your design about making sure that the experience and the reflection is contextualized and helping you to reinforce your academic content, then you are not compromising academic rigor at all. In terms of learning goals for students, those may vary for students within your course. Again, I mentioned before, like every student is coming to us with their own unique set of experiences prior to the course. And so I think community-based learning allows us some of the flexibility to kind of see that growth and development of individual students take place. And so some students may grow astronomically within a course, a community-based learning course, because of maybe limited experiences prior to coming into that course, compared to another student that may have, they spent their entire high school experience volunteering every single weekend and, working through some of, understanding community. So those learning goals, you can kind of work with them to individualize some of those learning goals. In terms of establishing criteria for selection of community service placements, if you are working with students and you're asking them to find their own community partner to work with, then you need to have really clear goals about like what you're expecting with that partnership, how the students are approaching that in a mutually beneficial way, so that the partner is is a partner in that relationship and not just providing service hours or not just providing students with opportunities. The educationally sound mechanisms to harvest the community learning. So again, this kind of goes back to the reflection activities and the assignments. And again, not having it be busy work, but that, you're asking them to intentionally do these types of activities. So you're going to intentionally design mechanisms within your teaching, whether that's discussions or reflection activities or assignments, to be able to help them process through that and make sense of it. I think the first bullet on this is a repeat from the last, but the distinction between students' community learning role and the classroom learning role. And this, again, kind of fits a lot with the flipped classroom too. So students will often think, oh, well, I'm in class or I'm in my Zoom session. So this is where I have my hat on, where I learn, right? But whenever I go out and I do my community service or I do my community activities, I'm not learning then, right? Or they don't necessarily think about their role in that context as being a learner. It's more of delivering a service or delivering, a certain number of hours. So help them see that, there aren't these boundaries maybe that they might have constructed for themselves, like they're learning all the time, right? They're learning in the classroom, they're learning outside of the classroom. And so you have to be, in your faculty role, you kind of have to help them break down that barrier of like learning only happens within the classroom. In terms of the faculty instruction role, I know I've mentioned this before that, you're a facilitator of reflection, you're a facilitator of activities, you're a facilitator of partnerships. You are still the content expert, but you're less in that role in a formal basis in a community-based learning course, again, because your students, your community partners, they have expertise and knowledge to share and to contribute to the conversations and the discussions that you have in the course. The uncertainty and variation, both within student learning outcomes, but then also uncertainty with how the course is implemented. There will be shifts and there will be changes that come up that, you may not be prepared for, but that's part of the learning process for both you and for the students. And so that kind of discomfort is a great opportunity for learning. And as you continue to teach your course, you will be better prepared for some of those changes or some of those unexpected things that come up. But there is a lot of ambiguity that is in this. And so again, as your role of a facilitator, you're helping the students work through that ambiguity. And then the maximizing the community responsibility for the course, can't emphasize it enough, trying to help the students recognize, that this is just as much about their personal learning experience as it is about meeting the needs of the community, right? So it's not just about them and what they get from it and what grade they get, but that they are working towards a larger purpose of helping to fulfill a community need. So I realize that we are at time. So I don't want to, I'm happy to continue going if you want to stay on the call, and I can kind of outline a couple of these example courses for you. But this is pretty much the last slide that I have. What would folks like to do?
I'm good with staying.
Okay.
I do have to attend another meeting in the next few minutes, so I'm afraid I'll have to head out.
Sure. Okay. Well, and again, we can I can send you some other materials too that kind of highlight some of these examples.
Okay.
And Annie, are you okay staying on too?
Yeah, I can stay.
Okay. Just I'll do my best to kind of summarize these succinctly. So Bonnie Mitchell, she is a faculty member in the School of Art, and her specialty is in animation. So for the past few years, she's actually been working with community organizations to develop public service announcements around a particular topic. So she's focusing in on like sustainability and the environment. Those are the organizations that she decided to work with, partly because it's one of her passion areas, and also because she was realizing that a lot of the students that she was working with didn't have any understanding of like environmental issues or sustainability issues. So it was a unique way for her to be able to kind of merge some of her personal interests with her animation course. So for the course, students are paired up with a different community organization. And so they have to talk with that community organization. And most of those meetings actually happen through webinars like this, where they're learning about that community organization, what their mission is, what they're trying to accomplish. But then they start having conversations as a client about, okay, here's the public service announcement that would be really helpful for us as an organization. So then the students take their animation knowledge and expertise and do storyboards and share those storyboards back with the community partner. And throughout that entire process, you know, the community partner is having direct feedback. And then by the end of the course, there's a public presentation of those final public service announcements that are created. And then the community partners, as well as other people that are invited to that public event, provide even more feedback to the students about this is what they liked about the animation. This is what, you know, this concept came off really well, or I didn't really see that concept. So they get a lot of really constructive feedback, and then they utilize that final feedback to produce the final version of the public service announcement, which then is shared with the community organization, and the community organization can utilize it on their websites or in other areas that they utilize. So in that particular model, you know, Bonnie is really facilitating, you know, the topic, but then also reaching out to the community partners and kind of setting those up ahead of time. And then once she connects the community or the student groups to the partners, the students take it over from there, right? So she's provided some foundational structure for the students, but then kind of gives them the freedom to work with the community partner. And on a regular basis, she's checking in with the community partners just to kind of see how it's going and just assure that the students are following through on their commitment. And if there's any, you know, challenges that are arising, then she can kind of be there to kind of, you know, encourage the students to do the follow-up. So that's one particular example. Heather Jordan, she teaches a technical writing course. And so in the technical writing course, one of the things that's very unique about this course is it brings together students from a lot of different majors. It's not just one particular type of major in that course. So in her particular course, she actually had a lot of VCT majors, so visual communication technology majors. She had science students, like STEM students. She had students that were in English and literature. So there was quite a variety of students that were in her course. And so she was very intentional in setting up student teams that represented the variety of different academic programs that were in that course. And so then she worked with me a lot actually to identify, okay, what are some projects in the community that you know, we can work on, or that our students can produce technical materials, technical communication materials for those community organizations. So we worked with Habitat for Humanity of Wood County. We worked for the Legal Aid of Western Ohio. And so like for that particular example, Legal Aid of Western Ohio, one of the things that they put together was, you know, the clients that Legal Aid works with, you know, they've never been to court before. And so if it's their first time going to court, there's a lot of traditions and things to be aware of. So it could be as simple as like, where do you park? How do you dress? How do you address the judge? You know, what should you bring with you? You know, like, so kind of like, what is the experience going to be when you arrive at court, and just trying to prepare clients for that experience. And so the students put together some brochures, and they put together some videos, because they actually had a couple of BCT students in that group. So they put together the videos, and they put together the brochures that now the Legal Aid of Western Ohio actually has on their website and shares with their clients on a regular basis. So that's, you know, one of the courses in terms of technical writing, where the students were, again, they were working with, here's an identified community need. Here's how I can apply my technical expertise as a technical writer and produce some of these products for these community organizations. For Valeria's course, which is Exploring Latina Culture, her goals for this particular course were that she wanted students to have a variety of experiences and not to think of Latino or Latina culture as unidimensional, right? That there's not just one particular form of Latino or Latina culture, right? That there are various different forms taking place in a variety of different areas. And so she works with, you know, a variety of different community organizations. So like Adelante, La Conexión, there's a bilingual school up in Toledo that they partner with every year. And so these are ongoing community partners that she's worked with now for, I want to say 12 years or so. And so every year the student groups are doing direct service at the site. They have pretty significant proficiency in Spanish. And so they are able to kind of communicate in Spanish. And it's not necessarily a course that's focused on like developing more Spanish proficiency, but it's helping, again, to understand the culture, the diversity of culture within the Latino community, and how that plays out in these different settings. And so through the community-based experience, you know, they're reflecting about that on a regular basis over the course, to talk about, you know, what projects they're engaged with, and specifically like in Toledo, what the Latino culture looks like within Toledo, in those neighborhoods, what kind of community initiatives are going on. And so a lot of that is being brought back into the discussions that everyone's having on a regular basis within this course. Towards the end of the semester, they do pull together all the community partners and the student groups for a large like end of semester presentation where they talk about their learning. So that D.E.A.L model where they're articulating their learning, they're sharing that with the community partners as well as the other students within the course to show the variation of the experience within each of those different organizations. So those are three examples. One of the materials I will send to you is a document that kind of highlights these examples with some of the basic components of community-based learning kind of outlined a little bit more explicitly. And so you'll see some of that, and there's some additional examples within that document too. So that is the end of our presentation. I don't know if there are other questions or other content you were hoping to receive from this workshop.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you for staying over a little bit. I will send you out the link to the video as soon as it gets finished recording here, and then the PowerPoint and that document I referenced. But and I guess I will also say that if you wanted to have a one-on-one conversation and get to just talk through, you know, your activities and what you're thinking, we're always happy to do that. You know, we can do it this way, or I'm actually in the office in person. So if you wanted to do it that way too, I'm open to that as well. But yeah, so we want to be able to help connect you to those community partners and, you know, other resources that might be helpful for you. Great. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.